Welcome back, everyone, for yet another video session of the community groups at The Pursuit. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving, filled with lots of food, family, friends, and, of course, football. But even more so, I hope that it was a time that you could reflect on all the blessings God has given. And before we get started with today's session, do not forget, we are taking a break from our group's videos during the month of December, but we will be back with new videos again with our January message series. This week, Pastor Nick closed out our Life on Loan series. This series was all about learning how to be good stewards or managers of everything that God has given to us. And Pastor Nick taught us on the principle of sowing and reaping. If you missed the message, I hope you can take time, check it out, and you can find a link to that service in the description below. Now, maybe you've heard about things like what goes around comes around, or you've likely heard people talking about karma. Sometimes people have a tendency to take the principle of sowing and reaping and they'll equate it to those same ideas. But is that really what God means? And is that interpretation even biblical? Well, let's dive in and take a look at that today. First of all, this principle of sowing and reaping, it's actually quite common throughout the Bible. I believe it's because it's easy for us to understand. The practice of working the ground, planting seeds in hopes of a harvest, it's as old as about humanity itself. In fact, part of the curse for Adam was that the ground would bring forth thorns and thistles in response to his work. Adam understood the concept of you reap what you sow, both literally and figuratively. Today, for us, we are most familiar with this concept from two different passages, both of which were written in letters from Paul. First, in 2 Corinthians 9:6, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. See, it doesn't require a farming background to understand this concept. If you were to only plant a seed or two, you shouldn't expect a massive harvest. But if you optimize your seed population, you can expect to maximize your yield potential. The other writing we see from Paul is Galatians chapter 6. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. As a general rule, it is true that sowing does lead to reaping. It is true in agriculture, and it is true in life choices, too. The thing that I'd like to offer is that, as is often the case, we tend to be short-sighted with this concept. For lack of a better way to put it, we expect the growing season to be rather short. That if we sow good seeds, we should almost immediately reap a good harvest. But is that what God really intends with this concept? You see, as is often the case, God has the long view in mind. In fact, if you extend the view out to Judgment Day, in other words, think of Judgment Day being the day of harvest, well, then I believe this concept is really biblical. It is then that it becomes separated from the rest of common cultural concepts of karma, or you get what you give, or what goes around comes around. If we try to apply this to our everyday life, we might get discouraged because some people don't seem to be reaping what they're sowing, or other people seem to be reaping the benefits that I expect I should receive while I'm trying to reap, but all indications are I'm just stuck in a severe drought. Take Job, for instance. In chapter 4, Job's friend Eliphaz was trying to help reconcile the trials Job was going through when he said this: those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. Problem was, Eliphaz was wrong about Job. Job hadn't been plowing iniquity and sowing trouble. If we try to apply the concept of sowing and reaping into the short term, we might commit the same mistake as Eliphaz, possibly assuming there's been some trouble and iniquity that's being sown. But in the long term is where we see the real harvest. It would have been easy for Job to have been discouraged, having lived a good life of continually sowing good seeds, but not seeming to reap the rewards, so to speak. But Job, continually sowing good seeds, finally saw a harvest of great blessing. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. In fact, we're told God gave to Job twice of what he had before. God thinks bigger than the here and now. Sometimes what looks like a harvest in the short term actually isn't one. There's still a harvest to come. Furthermore, we see in Galatians 6, verse 8, the talk of what kinds of seeds as well as an eternal focus. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. This gives the bigger picture that on Judgment Day, it will be a time to see the works of my entire life, not just the moments within my life. But these works are categorized into two categories of seeds, those of the flesh and those of the Spirit. To better understand these, Paul already gave us what those mean in chapter 5 of Galatians. Paul says the works of the flesh are giving into our own desires. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. In other words, these are the seeds that will reap an eternally poor harvest. On the other hand, Paul then lays out what good seeds to be sown would be, or as he puts them in chapter 5, fruits of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are the things that we should be seeking to sow. This is the good we should be doing, making sure it is a biblical view, not a worldview of these qualities or seeds. The love that is spoken, we always need to have that where we place God at the top priority. Because it's when we place other things at the top priority of love that we begin falling into idolatry, selfishness, and we then begin sowing seeds of the flesh. Sowing seeds of the Spirit always requires a love of God first. In chapter 6, Paul explains the expectations of carrying this out. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. What is it exactly that we will reap in due season? Well, the idea of sowing and reaping really goes back to God's justice. While there is a spiritual principle at work that if we sow bad things, things of the flesh, we will reap bad things, there's also mercy. Graciously through God's mercy, we don't always reap what we sow. God reserves the right to sow mercy on whomever he will. In Romans chapter 9, Paul wrote this, describing what God said to Moses. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. It is because of the mercy and compassion of God that we can have a home in heaven despite our sin. We sowed iniquity and corruption, and Jesus reaped our punishment on the cross. Faith in Jesus and pursuing godliness is sowing to the Spirit. Sowing to the flesh, depending on ourselves and our own abilities to find our own way without God's help, will reap nothing but a dead end. But when we place our trust in Jesus Christ, we reap eternal life because his love is fertile ground. So I challenge and I encourage you to approach sowing and reaping with an eternal mindset, giving thanks for God's mercy. Now, as you close out your time together, make sure that you take time to discuss your thoughts on these ideas, scriptures, and how you believe God is speaking to you through this. And to help you have conversations in your group, we provide you with a discussion guide that you are encouraged to use as you dive deeper into this topic and more. You can find that linked in the video description. And as always, before you close your time together, make sure that you share your prayer needs and take time to pray together. Finally, make sure that you and your group, you come up with a plan to meet during the month of December, even taking time to enjoy life together and maybe even celebrate Christmas.